It's become a little bit trendy to talk about consuming salt during a fast. Seems like everyone's kind of jumped on that bandwagon, and I get it. Okay, I've talked about it. I do feel that having salt during a fast is quite important, simply to keep your serum electrolyte levels, where they should be. But we have to look at the big picture. We have to look at the overall biochemistry, what's happening inside the body during a fast, because if we have too much salt after we break a fast, we could end up triggering an issue. So this video is about how to break your fast and balance your electrolytes a little bit. I do want to ask that you hit that red subscribe button, and then please do hit that bell icon so you can get notifications and know whenever we are posting up a new educational video, which is just about daily, so you can arm yourself with that biochemistry knowledge to make yourself the best version of yourself. Okay, so here's what's going on. During a fast, your body does an exceptional job at taking electrolytes out of the cell and putting them into the bloodstream. Okay, so what I mean by this is you're fasting, you're going along your merry way, but what's going on is that you're not consuming food, so your electrolytes get somewhat depleted. Okay, yes, and it's been demonstrated in studies that you do deplete magnesium, you do deplete sodium, you go through them without a doubt, and you should replete them during your fast if you want to. But also remember that your body does just a phenomenal job at taking electrolytes out of the cell itself and put it into the bloodstream to maintain electrolyte homeostasis the best that it can. So that doesn't mean you don't need electrolytes, but it means that the purpose of taking electrolytes in during your fast is to try to restore some of the cellular level of electrolytes. Anyhow, here's my point. Because you have such a strong contrast between the level of electrolytes in your cell and the level of electrolytes in the blood, when you do finally break your fast and allow the food and everything, the nutrients, to go into the cell, you're also allowing a huge flood of electrolytes into the cell. It's actually called the refeeding syndrome. Because of what is called osmolarity, all the electrolytes that have essentially pooled in your blood will now rush into the cell as soon as they have an opportunity, because by contrast, the cell doesn't have electrolytes, the blood does, so all of a sudden insulin spikes and whoosh, they all flood in. But what happens if you add extra electrolytes to that, namely sodium? Well, that's going to add fuel to the fire, and it's going to flood in even more. Okay, does this really cause that big of a problem? Well, there's two big issues that we need to discuss here. Okay, the one issue is sort of the actual cellular health issue. Every time you have magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, things like that, potassium, flooding into a cell, moving really fast like that, you run the risk of damaging the cellular membrane. Okay, that cellular membrane is what allows nutrients to come in and out, pass in and out, get into the cell, get into the mitochondria, metabolic function at its core. So if we damage that cellular membrane, because we have just massive influx of electrolytes coming in, we could potentially be causing some issues. Now, full disclaimer, this isn't going to apply to the everyday 16-hour fast. This applies to slightly longer fasts. And if you're a more seasoned faster, it's not as big of an issue. Am I saying do not have any salt after your fast? No, not at all. I'm just saying that when we talk about salt being this amazing thing for an intermittent fasting regimen as a whole, we need to back it up a little bit, and we need to compartmentalize where salt is amazing for your fast. Because I don't want to go out on a limb and just tell everyone to load up on salt when you break your fast, you could be causing an issue. So here's what happens. You eat food after your fast and it spikes your insulin. Okay, when it spikes your insulin, what happens is the cell doorway opens, and that is what allows protein and carbohydrates and everything to get into the cell. So if you break your fast and you have a bunch of carbohydrates, you spike your insulin even more, which means you open the door even more, which means you allow even more electrolytes to flood in even faster. So your electrolytes are just hanging out in the bloodstream, waiting for that insulin to come and open the door so that they can rush in. Okay, so we just want to be cognizant of that. So again, what this comes back to is not combining a bunch of carbohydrates with a bunch of salt. Now there's the other issue I want to talk about. Number two is that when you have a lot of carbohydrates coming in after a fast, because you're so insulin sensitive, you're going to draw a lot of water into the cell. But namely, you're going to draw water and sodium, and your body's going to hold on to that sodium. That's going to lead to edema. Let me ask you this. Have you ever done an intermittent fast or even a longer term fast, and after you break your fast, you feel insanely bloated? It's like you're And I just mean like overall, like puffy, water retention. Well, like during your fast, you feel so clean, so crisp, so lean, so your skin is like paper thin. You feel like you can see your muscles even, and then all of a sudden you break your fast and an hour later you're like a doughboy, right? That is just exactly what I'm talking about. It's very important you break your fast strategically, and it's very important that you just keep sodium to a minimum and that you keep your carbohydrates to a minimum unless you know what you're doing there. FYI, if you're interested, I do have a link down to Thrive Market down below. Thrive Market's an online membership-based grocery store. They are a tremendous sponsor of this channel. They support this channel through and through, but just because I've done so many fasting videos with them and things like that, I went ahead and I created specific fasting bundles, which contain different kinds of foods and things like that that I would personally recommend during your eating window of a fast. Not necessarily what you would break your fast with, but just sort of Thomas stamp of approval foods that you could eat during your eating window. So highly recommend you check them out down below if you're doing an intermittent fasting regimen. And a big thank you to Thrive Market, and a big thank you for supporting and keeping this channel going. Best way you can support us is by supporting them. So check them out down below. So then what does it look like overall? Like, do you keep sodium out of the equation for a longer period of time, or just when you break your fast, or what? What I would recommend is this. If you're willing to have carbohydrates after your fast, which I understand some people do, it depends on what you're doing, I would recommend keeping your sodium relatively low. Very low, in fact. Okay, because you're going to have enough sodium in your bloodstream to get the job done, to fire the SGLT1 transporters, and everything like that's going to allow the shuttle to get glucose to get shuttled in. So don't really worry too much about like that. You've got enough salt, but I would recommend still keeping it somewhat minimal. Make sure that you are combining those carbohydrates with a good amount of protein. You should definitely be having more protein than you are carbohydrates. Information purposes only, but I would say, for example, you might want to have like 40 grams of protein, 20 grams of carbs. More protein than carbohydrates. Why? Because it's going to slow down that insulin spike a little bit, but it's going to allow the cell to take in that protein more so than just taking a bunch of sugar, okay? So we don't want just too much in the way of carbohydrates. Next up, you can go ahead and you can start to add salt a couple hours later and you start to get your body back into balance. Now, on the contrary, if you're not having carbohydrates, you have a little bit more flexibility to have sodium. I don't recommend having a bunch of it, but you got to remember it's the sodium and the carbohydrates kind of working in tandem with that insulin spike. But your body will still have an insulin spike from protein. So don't let people fool you. If you have a lean chicken breast, that is spiking your insulin too. You do not just need carbohydrates to spike your insulin. Granted, carbohydrates are going to spike it much higher. So anyhow, that's the general gist of it, okay? You want to be able to keep it relatively controlled, moderate sodium if you're going to be having lean protein, very low sodium if you're having carbohydrates in the mix as well. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.